Al, if you're willing to start with a more general
Yeah,
week 2 question rather than there's a good one in the forums if you want to.
good. Let's hear it.
Yeah. Okay. So Carolyn asks, I've been struck and a bit dismayed by how many of the poems we've been studying so far have been about poetry, other poets making art, etc. Is that mainly because of the Whitman-Dickinson dichotomy currently underway? I'm hoping many of the poems going forward will be about life versus artistic navel
Hey,
gazing.
what a great question.
Yeah.
I can't wait for Kate, Gabe, and Dave Poplar to answer this question. So I'm going to reinterpret the question, Carolyn, and forgive me. This is something teachers do when they're really being annoying, which is to paraphrase a question to frame it in a way that I know will generate a discussion. In a sense, what you're saying is, what's all this about all these meta poems? Why is everything about poetry? Poems could be about life. They could be about things in the world, and we want them to be. Is this just the way the course is starting, or are we going to be just doing meta poems? So I guess I'm asking Gabe, Kate, and Dave to say something perhaps in defense of the importance of poetry that is aware of itself as a poem. So we'll start with Gabe and then go to Kate.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I'll say there's a part of that that's totally fair, which is ModPo does like meta poems. But I think the distinction that's being made in that question is actually not the best reflection of the content of this week. So the distinction between poems about poetry and art making or poems about life. So to like give an example in this week that we were going to talk about, like Supermarket in California, for example, that is a poem that to me is so about ordinary life and ordinary living, but it's happening through these apostrophes to these big historical figures, these artists that influence Ginsberg. So it is true that we like poems about poems because we want to show, and we think that these poems kind of teach really well how these writers are dealing with their form, what their form can do in the world, what their form can do in politics and ordinary life. And they're really conscious of the fact that they're making a construction and not just pretending to be like, I don't know, truth tellers or soothsayers or something like that. So
that's such a good response, Gabe. I'm so glad I asked you to speak first of the three of you because you basically addressed it as a general question. And that's really, I think it's really important. And you didn't like get strident in defense of poems about poetry, which I'll do in a few minutes. So thank you, Gabe. Kate, what are your thoughts about the predominance of meta poetry, or why Carolyn should hang on and enjoy the meta poetry because it does lead to life?
Well, because the rubric of this course is modernism, the modernists were more, if possibly equally, but more interested in the way in which language invents the world, as opposed to reflecting it. And I think that results in these poems that are mostly concerned with the process of their own creation. And I invoked this earlier when Al and I were having a discussion earlier today, how William Carlos Williams described a poem as a machine made of words. And that for me as a poet is what's most interesting about poetic forms, is that you can take advantage of constraint in order to examine the ways in which words invent the world. And you can torque and really knead and work the words in order to, serve that investigation.
That's perfectly said, Kate. And before we turn to Dave, we were talking about an Elizabeth Willis poem in our poem talk today, a couple hours ago. Do you remember the line that ends noun, noun, noun? Do you remember the beginning of that line?
Do I?
Yeah.
Oh gosh, it was something about the world clattering.
Yeah, or
clatter with the verb.
Yeah, so
noun.
Something about the noise of kind of crashing, clattering, and then a colon, and then noun, noun, noun. That's a metapoetic moment because there is a world that's very noisy, very clunky, very machine-like in that poem. But then you get noun, 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 as if the words are the ones making the noise. Well, actually the words are making the noise because all we've got is a poem. I don't actually have nouns clattering around in the landscape or in the machine. I have words, nouns, and it's a perfect point. So yeah, language to the end of it. Dave Poplar. So why talk to Carolyn directly? Why is it okay to do so much meta poetry?
Yeah, I view the question as a concern with substance over process, almost in a sense. Like, why are we reading poems that are so overtly talking about the process? Let's get into the substance. But like, I think Kate said it amazingly well. I can't do it any better. But the concern here is recognizing that the substance is really revealed in the process. In fact, the process is substance. So when we're reading these poems, it's not really just about poetry. It's the process itself, the poetry itself is really about the substance, about the life that we're talking about.
So there's no poetic content without form, or how you say what you say is as important as what you say. There's no such thing as a transparent language. Language is always a non-transparency. It's always going to stand in the way between you and the world. And so you want to be conscious of that filter. That was such a great question. Thank you for directing us that way, Anna.